Welcome, everybody, to our very first podcast. This is something that we have been wanting to do for a very long time, years in the making, actually.
That's right.
So I'm really excited to be bringing on my good friend and team member, JuanCarlos Zazueta.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be the first one that gets to be on the podcast, and I think there's a lot of fun ones that are going to come. So we got to set the example today, but more than anything, I'm actually super happy to just tell my story.
Yeah, I wanted to bring him on here and talk about his background, where he came from, kind of a little story of rising up and the beauty industry being a part of that, and obviously us working together for the majority of your career now, right?
Yeah, right out of beauty school. I met you while I was still in beauty school.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy.
Let's start in the beginning. Let's go to your childhood, how you grew up. I know that you have Mexican heritage, but you're also a U.S. citizen, so you were born here in the U.S. Did you live both in the U.S. and in Mexico growing up?
Yeah, growing up was awesome, especially when you're a first-generation American, because there's so much culture to your upbringing. So I'm a first-generation American. My mom is Mexican. My father's Mexican. And I was born in Truckee, California, which, if you don't know, you probably know Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe is beautiful, one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I grew up most of my time in Reno. I can remember, other than when I went back and vacationed as a teenager. When my mom migrated to the U.S., she lived in Lake Tahoe for a while, which that was pretty cool because growing up in that type of environment, you get the lake, you get all the forest and all that. And then around second grade is when I moved to Reno. So we moved to Reno. My mom was a single mother, and she was just an absolute gangster. You know, where we come from in Mexico is a very, very, very poor, isolated area, right? So I still have a lot of family over there. And when my mom sacrificed, being close to her family, being close to her mother, both parents, they come from a sibling of 12. So 12 siblings, and leaving all that behind to provide a better future for us, that's a big move. And when we moved to the U.S. and growing up in that situation where you have a single mother, even though my father was present, he was present a little bit more financially than anything else. There's a lot of sacrifices that have to be made by the mother in that situation. So she was working 2 jobs, at times 3, trying to provide for my sister and I, trying to make sure that we can be in extracurricular activities like soccer, boxing, cheerleading, or gymnastics for my sister. And so you spend a lot of time, being babysat. Luckily, we had some family that could babysit us, but a lot of times, it was just me and my sister kind of mending for ourselves. So I was, 9, 10, 11, looking out for my little sister, and I remember being 12 and 13 years old and already kind of being influenced by the streets, because when you are a single mother and you just, you migrated to the U.S. and you're trying to make it, there's so many things that you don't truly understand yet, So my mom had to learn so much, not only about, work ethic in the U.S., but she didn't know much about credit, how the housing works out here, how to really prosper with everything that America has to offer, right? So a lot of people who migrate, what you see is just a lot of working sacrifice. They think you just work. At least back in the day, that's how it was, right? So with my mom having to work all the time, it was like, okay, well, my sister and I had that responsibility of just making sure that we stayed away from outside influences. And it was around 12, 13 years old when I think I started kind of getting involved with what was around where we lived, which was, the gangs, graffiti crews, graffiti cliques. And you start to kind of be influenced by that. And at that age, you don't really know the sacrifices that your mom made to come to the U.S. and to provide the lifestyle that she provides for you, right? And so my sister and I, we always just looked out for each other. But because there is a 4-year difference, she kind of looked up to me a lot more than just a brother and sister relationship. I was that male figure in her life. I was that father figure in her life. But with me getting involved in the streets at such a young age, it affected her a little bit differently, right? Mm-hmm. And me as well. I was, 12, 13 years old when I started getting in a lot of trouble. I thank God every day that I didn't get really influenced by drugs, because who knows how that would have turned out. Mm-hmm. But what was crazy is that the core group of friends, the gang that I was a part of, the crew, basically those are all my brothers. Mm-hmm. To this day, I still look at them as my brothers, because it wasn't that we were bad people. We just knew no better, except for maybe 1 or 2 of us. None of us had fathers, So it was me and a group of like 12, 13, 14 kids that grew up basically fatherless, with hardworking mothers in the hood. And it was just like all we had was kind of each other to influence ourselves with a male figure. Like we became each other's male figures. And that group of friends had people who were good at, some had a good work ethic, some didn't. Some were very creative, others weren't. And so whatever holes we didn't have, we filled for each other. The problem was that we didn't know what to do with that. And we became a product of our environment. And it was like, well, we're poor. We come from, we have necessities. Like you're influenced by hip hop and rap. You're influenced by all these things. So it's like, how do you influence yourself in that way when the only thing that is influencing you are the other gang OGs, right? What ended up happening in our situation was that we, started burglarizing. We started, we got involved in graffiti. We got involved in drugs. And that became pretty hard for my mother because she sacrificed everything, her family and all that. And here I am throwing it all away. And then, I was great at sports. I was good at a lot of things, but all that just kind of got thrown in the trash when I found, my community, which ended up being the gangs in the streets. A lot of people look back like they leave that life and it's like, well, I no longer talk to those people or those are no longer my friends. And I don't see it that way. Like I still got so much love for those dudes because we kept each other alive in really, really bad situations. Those are still my brothers to this day. I still talk to them. And but I did have to, distance myself because I wanted to change my life, and this industry allowed me and gave me the power to change my life because so much happened from my teenage years, from when I was 12 and 13 years old to when I was, heading into prison at 20 years old. And during that time, my sister, my mom, my family, and my guys, that's like all I had during those years, and those were some really dark times. Looking back at it, when you get out, you look back at it and at the time you don't notice it, but you realize like, dang, I can't believe I was doing a lot of those things. I can't believe I survived a lot of those situations. I'm blessed to be alive. When you kind of go into the moments where you do start to change your lives, like the years that I've been, the years after prison, being on the Ashlee Norman hair team and in the hair industry, those years, what I've been doing is rebuilding my trust with my family, finding out who I truly am inside, serving my community, finding myself within God, and trying to fix the relationships with my mother and my sister, and working through a lot of the traumas that we put ourselves through or that I had to put my family through. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how I grew up.
Okay, so now that we've kind of like touched a little bit on your background and where you kind of came from, so what situation basically took you from growing up this way, having these influences, coming from, a single mom immigrant, dealing with the toxic influences, from what point did you turn from there to working into the beauty industry, which ended up where you are now, which is, a very successful hairstylist, an education leader, both in your salon as well as with other brands and within my brand. What was the change? Like, what was the situation, the circumstance that took you from there to here?
So I give all glory to God. But the situation and the change was my wife, Leslie. Leslie came into my life and like when I was at my darkest, like I'm talking about, facing 2 8 to 16 prison sentences. My family already did everything. They're exhausted. They're not giving up on me. My family would never turn their back on each other, but they're exhausted. No. I've already told them I was going to change a million times and didn't. Mm-hmm. And when Leslie came into my life, I've known her since middle school, but my wife, I didn't start talking to her until I was out of county jail after a car accident that I was involved in. And that's really the pivotal moment that completely changed my life. So at this point, I'm 18, 19 years old. I keep trying to find ways to start to generate, a career or a job or something. And me and the group of guys who I grew up with, we're all trying to grow out of a certain system, right? And so we're all trying to kind of do our own thing and we're turning into men. But when you're from the streets and you understand that it's very hard to go and work a minimum wage job or go make, $20 an hour when you can go and flip a bag and then, you're up. And so it's very hard to live that lifestyle behind, when that's all you know. You haven't learned an alternative. So when Leslie came into my life, before that, I was working at a car dealership. And this car dealership was the number one car dealership in Reno. And I started as a car salesman. But during this time, I was still really involved in a lot of things I didn't want to be involved with anymore. And one night, we were celebrating a certain amount of sales for the car dealership. And so I was out partying and drinking. And, I was with some girl. And I told her, I'm like, hey, let's get out of here, And so as I'm going and hopping on the freeway, I, in the car, had a bag of drugs. I had a gun. I had a lot of things with me that I shouldn't have had. And I was under the influence. And so at this point, I felt like the police officers were already waiting for me because there was an SUV outside of where I was. And then there was an SUV on the freeway. So when I got out, when I got onto the freeway, I got the lights blurred on me right away. So then I just floored it, got into a little high-speed chase. And that was the biggest mistake that I think I've done, because not only was I drunk and acting irresponsible, but I was jeopardizing the girl's life that was with me. And like I said, I if there's one thing about me and the people I hung out with and all that, yes, we weren't doing good things, but we were not drug addicts. We never let each other do meth. We never let each other get on hair. We always looked out for each other. We were a brotherhood. When that happened, and knowing that I could have essentially ended the life of a couple of people, that really hurt me, because that's not the type of person that I am. I was trying to make it out. And so I wasn't doing it the right way. When I got into that car accident, I was going about 130 miles per hour when there was a vehicle that was getting onto the freeway, and I clipped the corner and the car flipped. Wow. And my car, with the girl inside it, actually flipped off the freeway and went 70 feet down the bridge and down. So when the car flipped and did everything that it did, I looked over and the girl was just kind of hanging there. She was bleeding. I was bleeding. I managed to undo my seatbelt, get out of the car, and I remember just thinking, I got to get out of here. I pulled the girl out of the car, take the stuff that was in there with me. I look up and I can see on top of the bridge the other vehicle and all the cop lights, but no one was looking under the bridge. So I think that the police officers thought that I had left. So at that point, I start thinking, erratically again, and I take the girl with me. I start walking down towards where the homes are. I sit her up against the fence. I hide the stuff that I have, and my mind is working I need to get out of here. I need to drop her off at a hospital or something, and I need to go. And at this point, the cars are stopping at a stop sign, so I go and I try to steal someone's car. And the guy that gets out ends up being a big old dude. I later found out on the reports that this guy was a local football coach. Well, he gets out and he ends up whooping me, Oh, wow. He just whoops me. And it's what I needed, because he pinned me down. The police got there. And I remember not knowing whether that girl was okay, whether the person that I had hit was okay. And I remember saying a prayer, and I said, God, if you can just help me make sure that nobody is dead, that everybody is alive, then at this point, I will surrender my life to you, and it doesn't matter what happens with me, as long as nobody died. When I said that, the cops were there, they got there, the cop was already on my back, and when I said that prayer, I heard over his radio that the person in the vehicle was fine. And I told the cops, you guys have to help that girl that's over there. She came out, and then she was fine too. And that was the changing moment for my life, because at that point, I got my prayer answered. I was alive. The people were alive. And I knew I was going to face some time. And that was the changing moment, because then when I went through that, everyone had given up on me except, my best friend, who I could count on that dude whenever. My mother, I was so scared to call her and give her a news like that, because I had already put her through hell, and so when I was in county jail and got released, because the hospital wouldn't release the medical records, so the only thing they could hold me for was driving under the influence, which caused substantial bodily harm. Without the medical records, they can't hold that. And they never found the bags that they wanted to find. They never found me with the gun, and they never found me with drugs. So what ended up happening was they released me on OR. And during OR, I was depressed. I didn't know what to think. On paper, I was facing 16 years. And so, I messaged Leslie, who at the time I hadn't talked to in a long time. And I said, hey, I really want to get close to God. I don't know how. I remember you telling me you were a youth leader at your church. Can I go to church with you? And she said yes. And at this point, I didn't even have a car. Obviously, I was on house arrest. And so I told her, you would just have to pick me up. She said, it's okay. I'll pick you up and I'll start taking you to church.
Wow.
My changing moment in life was the car accident and my wife taking me to church, because that's where I got saved at that church. I knew how to build a relationship with God. I knew that with God in my life, I could change, And so that was the moment that changed it all. Because then from there, what ended up happening was I was out for about a year. Leslie and I fell in love. I ended up getting sentenced to prison for 2 years. I got a 2 to 20. And the reason why was because when my sentencing date came, the girl who was in the vehicle, her and I, we worked together, and it was very unfortunate how things happened. And I feel blessed that she's alive, but she also had been through a lot throughout life. So I think she was also grateful to be alive. So at my sentencing date, like she didn't show up. So that ends up working towards my favor. And then the guy who I had hit, he actually, it's crazy because he wrote a letter in, and in that letter he had said, that he had been involved in a DUI car accident as well in the past, and that he knew that I was there, and that if what was going through my head was anything like what went through his head when he was sentenced to do his time, that he knew I had changed. So the judge really said, like, hey, you must have somebody looking down on you, because I was gonna put the hammer down on you, but I feel like you need a second chance at life.
Wow.
And so I'm going to give you a 2 to 20-year sentence. I'll give you the minimum, which is 2. But if you mess up, I'll give you a maximum sentence, which is 20 years. Okay. So I ended up going to prison for 2 years. My wife at the time was my girlfriend, and she stuck with me the 2 years. And in prison, that's where I started. When I was out on OR for a year, that's when I started cutting hair. And in prison, I realized, like, there's much more to hair than people know. Because in prison, the trip about cutting hair in prison is all the prison politics. So in prison, even though I was on OR for a year and I was cutting hair, my clients were UNR basketball players, were, all ethnicities. Everybody was supporting me, turning my life around and all that. Well, I get sentenced to prison. And then in prison, they're like, well, you can't cut black people's hair. You can't do this with a black person. You can't do this with these races. You can only do this with this race. You can only, the prison politics are crazy, especially when you're affiliated with the gang. So that was a trip, because there was so much that I knew wasn't a part of me, Like, there was so many things that were happening during that time that were just like causing me to self-reflect and think, who really are you? Like, what is it that you really want out of life? And when I was in prison, there was a prison riot. And I ended up doing 13 months in the hole, which is 24-hour segregation. Wow. And those 13 months in the hole, all I had was a 6x12 cell, where the only 2 phone calls you get is 2 15-minute phone calls a week. 1 phone call I used for Leslie, the other phone call I used for my mom. And I would write to my wife every week. She would write to me. I would write to certain friends that I knew I can count on. And they would write back, but Leslie would send me pictures of my haircuts that I had done. She said, hey, don't lose your passion. Remember, you're going to come out and you're going to do this, and remember all the dreams that you have. Like, don't get depressed, And then my boy Seymour, who now he owns a barbershop in Reno now, members only. Seymour would send me pictures of his work. And he'd be like, hey, check this out. These are the haircuts that are trending. Hey, check this out, dude. Like, look at what I accomplished. He did his first barber battle. Sent me a picture. I won my first barber battle, and I was in prison, like, thinking, I can't wait to get out there and do that. And during that time, I was just working on myself. Well, what are my skills? What is my potential? Praying and praying and praying every day, And so when I got out, Leslie had a 2-bedroom apartment, and one of the bedrooms she turned into a salon chair. And that salon chair, I turned into like a barber shop. And for a year after I got out on parole, I started cutting hair. And I built this brand called Catch Fade, and people will probably see this and remember the brand. And everyone supported that, because people that knew where what I was trying to do were very encouraging of it, because it was like, hey, you guys are trying something new. Like, this could go somewhere, you know? We were making music videos. We were doing the UNR athletes. We were doing like all these cool things. And I built this barber brand up to a good following. And it was awesome because I made money. I made enough to save for an engagement ring. I got engaged with my wife. So I got released in November. And February, I got engaged. And then I got married September of 2018. So that all happened like within a year. When I got married in September of 2018, we got married September 1st. September 3rd, our lease was up on the apartment. My wife said, what do you want to do? And I said, you know, I want to continue doing hair, but there's no barber school in Reno. At the time, there wasn't any barber school in Reno. And I didn't even know that I was going to be doing women's hair. And so what ended up happening was, like, my wife's like, well, my brother Joe has a church in Las Vegas that I want to be a part of. I feel called by God to go be a part of that ministry. And so I told her, well, let's just go. And in 2 days, we decided to just pack our bags and leave. And our parents, everybody was like, what? All we had was my wife's little Honda Civic and whatever money we had from our wedding. That was it. So we decided to move to Las Vegas. When we got here, our car's engine blew up. Literally the same night we got here, our car engines blew up. The job that Leslie had lined up fell out. And we didn't have anything. We're freshly married and living with Joe, who is also our pastor. And so I got a job at Home Depot. I got a job at Pegs. Leslie would walk a mile to work, from work to the gym, and then wait till I could pick her up. Like, it was just, and Joe let us borrow a car. It was really cool, because that's like, you're so grateful for those moments now. And what ended up happening was, instead of signing up to barber school, because when I went to check out the barber schools out here, not to sound a certain way about it, but it felt like I was just going to hang out in another like prison hangout. You know, everybody's in there just talking about, you know, certain things. And I was like, I don't know, this is exactly what I'm trying to like leave behind. Not that it's like, oh, I don't want to be a part of that. I love the barber culture, but mentally I had already meditated for years on what I wanted. So I knew right then and there, this isn't what I want. So when I went to the beauty school and I saw kind of like the environment, the creativity, everybody talking about hair, doing hair, I'm like, this is it. And so I signed up to the Academy of Hair Design. And I was working at Pegs, working at Home Depot, and doing the Academy of Hair Design. And when I went to sign up, they actually gave me a Pell Grant, which a lot of people don't know this, but if you are trying to if you're trying to turn your life around and you're in prison and you just got released, or you're on parole or probation and you're trying to do something, if you enroll into a trade school a year after you got out, you're entitled to certain grants. Or you're provided certain grants. And so you can take advantage of them. And I took advantage of a $13,000 Pell Grant that encouraged me even more to go to beauty school. So things started working my way. And we were serving at church. Leslie and I were, you know, grinding, we were working, and we had this dream to build, you know, something in the hair industry, and we didn't know what that dream was going to be.
Right. Okay, so we've gone over a little bit about like your background, like how you grew up, and obviously, you know, the unfortunate situations that kind of landed you in jail. But then at the same time, that's really the point that helped you turn your life around, because it kind of was a rock bottom, let's call it. So you kind of hit that rock bottom, and then you had someone that was faithful in your life that ended up being kind of a savior in a sense, and now your partner in marriage. And now you're out of prison, you are enrolled in beauty school, you're on this path now to become a professional hairstylist in the beauty industry. So from there, what kind of transpired to you becoming an educator so quickly out of beauty school? Where did you start? What was your first salon you worked at? Tell me about that.
It's crazy because everything changed so fast. You know, like they say, careful what you pray for, because God will answer if the time is right. He's just gonna, you know, you'll ask for something and God will multiply it. And so that's exactly what ended up happening. I signed up for beauty school. They gave me a Pell Grant that helped me a lot financially. And when the first 3 months, I remember the teachers would tell me, hey, start doing women's hair, get into the long hair. And I'd be like, nah, I'm just here to do men's hair. I'm going to go back to Reno. I'm going to, you know, and finally, like, I remember one day just talking to my wife, and she's just like, you should just try it, or curl my hair. And there's a dude that was in beauty school at the time. His name is Bryson. I think he's at Makeshift Union here in Las Vegas now. Bryson, super quiet guy in beauty school. Like, you could just tell, like, you know, he's there just doing his thing. And so I went up to him, like, bro, teach me how to curl. And he taught me how to curl. And doing a beach wave, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, man. And then I was like, you know what? I think I am going to try cutting some hair. So then Bryson taught me how to curl the hair. And after that, I was kind of hooked. Then after that, I went into my first service on a woman. And then I quickly realized I didn't even have a vision for it. So when you don't look at women and look at the hair and think like, oh, what a cool technique, you don't know what to expect. And so that challenge alone frightened me so much that I'm like, man, this is pretty awesome. If I overcome this and learn, then I'm going to jump a big hurdle. And I think just that challenge, the nervousness, how frightened I felt wasn't like how I felt like that in the past. This was more so encouraging, like I felt called to feel that way. I loved feeling that uncomfortability. And that's when I just dove deep into the education. And one of the places where I was working at the time was Peg's Ham and Eggs. And across the street was the Capelli Salon. And on my break, I walked over there one day while they were having a Bellamy class, and I didn't even know what was going on. I just walked in there and I was like, hey, I'm in the beauty school and I'm looking at salons that I could possibly go into. And she was like, cool. They kind of just like, the front desk girl just kind of like shrugged me off. She's like, okay, cool. Yeah. Hey, fill this out. And so I just left my Instagram handle there and just kind of like walked out of there like, I probably shouldn't go in there on like clothes where I'm a busser, But what was crazy was that Carletta, the owner of Capelli, actually called me and she said, hey, I heard you walked into the salon. I just checked out your Instagram. I can't believe you're in beauty school. Can we meet up and talk? And so I did. I went and spoke with her and she's like, there's something about you that I kind of want to know. What's your story, dude? And so I told her my story and she said, I want to help you out. And like, when you graduate beauty school, you have a chair here and I'm going to put you in some education. And she stayed very true to her word. She put me in a class after I graduated beauty school, which was Sarai Spears' class, the Platinum Giraffe, which was a color correction class, super advanced. And a lot of the stuff kind of flew over my head. I remember we sat next to each other and you were there kind of asking all the right questions. And like, I was like, oh man, I sat down next to that girl, like, of course I did. And, but it was really cool because that's where we met. And I remember at the end, we exchanged Instagrams. And it kind of like really vibed after that. That class, when I look back on it, like everything Carletta did for me was amazing. She put me in front of a lot of educators. She let me host a lot of education, which we know the power of just being in front of it, power that has. And I'm so grateful for the Capelli team because they saved me when I was frying hair, when I was doing all these things. Like, all of us hairstylists do it, especially when you're starting off. And those girls and guys always had my back. And so I'm always very grateful for that time at Capelli and the girls that helped me. But the pivotal moment there was that class because that's where I met you. And I remember it was around like late in the year, like December, November, when you're like, I want to have team training in Las Vegas. Can you help me find some models? And I was like, yeah, I could do that. And so I got some models for you. You invited me to team training. Man, that was so cool because that's where I met Grayson. I met Christine. Anthony was on the team. Chester was there. It was really cool. I remember we even made a dance video, those dance videos we used to make. And what a fun weekend because I got one-on-one training with you guys. And the whole time I was on social media recording things. And I think that was like what I was able to bring to the team at that time was like, oh, well, there's this guy who, he needs to learn so much technically wise. He aligns with the team's values. I remember you telling me like, I can teach you a lot about hair and then you can help me record and do these things. That moment changed my life forever because I had just gone through Sarai Spears' class, which was one of the best classes to date that I've taken. And then I go to team training with the Ashley Norman hair team and I get one-on-one training with you. Grace and Troy's doing hair next to me. Christine, is really inspiring with everything she's teaching me and doing. And just the team's dynamic was just magical. The looks we created, shooting, working 12, 14 hours. I'm like, these are my people. I felt, just crazy inspired and motivated. I remember going home and talking to my wife about it. I remember from then, like, we followed up and I was buying a car. I remember clearly we were buying our first car from the Honda whose engine broke down. And you were like, hey, I want to get to know you a little bit. And I told you my story, and then you pitched the idea of traveling, and I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. It sounds like a dream come true. And I remember telling you, like, at this point, I wasn't comfortable with sharing my story, and I didn't know how it was going to be perceived by the industry. And so I remember, like, I've never been ashamed of who I am because God forgave me. Mm-hmm. I find forgiveness in Him. But you do feel some type of way when you're trying to, move up in life. And so I remember telling you like, hey, before I start traveling with you, I want you to know like I come with some baggage. I'm on parole. I still deal with a lot of things. And so I remember telling you my story and you're like, hey, you're exactly the type of person that represents this industry. And you're exactly the type of person who I want to mentor. And I remember you telling me like, my husband can teach you about finances. I can teach you about this, and the team can teach you about that. And you told me like, if you are serious about changing and you're true to your wife, you're true to God, I want you traveling with me. And I remember hanging up. I could cry right now. I remember hanging up and looking at my wife and just thinking like, damn, our life is gonna change, and then we bought a car at like fucking 17% interest, so stupid. But and then we started traveling, and you put me in front of the brands, you put me in front of the campaigns, you allowed me to have an opinion. You took me to classes, in every corner of the United States, and all you wanted in return was, hard work, loyalty, honesty, and stay true to the beliefs: God, family, faith, family, and the community that we're going to build in the hair industry, which is to really empower people, no narcissism, no ego, to serve our community. And that's what we've done since then. I mean, we've done campaigns for major companies. You've allowed me to negotiate my own contracts. I went from never living in a house to having a house in Sky Canyon with my family in it. The blessings that have came from this industry alone are not even monetarily, like it's so much growth as a man, respect for women. And my mom has always, no matter how down bad I was, she always told me, you never disrespect your elders or women. If you're true men, never do that. And so then going into this industry, my mom prepared me for it. And then you showed me like, hey, these women are already got a lot to deal with. Like, you better not be out here thinking with your dick. And so a lot of people think like, well, what have you been doing? How can you be in an industry like that with so many women? People don't know my story with my wife. People don't know my wife. People meet lesbian and right away they're like, man, that woman's an angel. It's been such a crazy journey because I've gotten one-on-one training with Chris on finances. I went from having a like 400 credit score to up like, I'm up there now. My wife, financially, we're doing well. We're on the Dave Ramsey. You put me onto the Dave Ramsey program. Now we're on the Dave Ramsey, making sure that, we live like nobody else right now so we can live like nobody else in the future. And I teach that to my team. Director of Education at Mosaic Salon with Michelle, another woman who leads with God in her heart and who gives me the opportunity to have free reign in her salon on how to, pour into her stylists. And the stylists there, as much as I learn from them, they also allow me to teach all the techniques to them that I'm trying out or want to take on the road. When I look back at what this industry has done and how much my life has changed, and to think that we're just getting started as a team is insane because, people think like, oh, well, to get out of the hood or to get out of a certain lifestyle, you just got to get out. It's not, there's psychological warfare that comes from that. There's so much that comes from it, and you don't necessarily need to leave to get out, but to really break some chains, you have to let go of a lot, to think like my daughter's going to go to a private school. That's our goal. Our goal is to work less so I could be at every event, to build a brand, to build the Ashlee Norman Academy, to build all these things, and be a part of a winning team. It takes so much more. So when people think like, oh, I made it in life, they probably put a financial number in front of it, but there's so much more to it. Like, I truly look at my family and think like, man, as a man, I really made it. I'm blessed with 2 kids, blessed with a great wife, a beautiful home. My sister's a business owner. She's fighting her own battles back home, but she's breaking so many chains, and I'm so proud of her, And a lot of people will look at it and be like, bro, like, what have you made it out of? But it doesn't even, like, I already won, And when it comes to the career, if you look at it, it's like, this is really amazing because the vision that we spoke about for the team, for the Ashlee Norman Academy, does it align with everything that I want for myself? It does. And, I want to serve this community for a long time because it's made me so strong and it's completely changed my life.
Awesome. So now you see why I wanted to bring him on and share his story, because I think it's a beautiful story that we can all learn a lot from. And, you know, I think what you just spoke about there in the last part about it is, that, you know, I think a lot of times when it comes to leadership in this industry, people think it's about glorifying them. And that's not really what it's about. It's about serving people. And that's something I think, you know, I saw just within this last weekend. We did a class together, and seeing someone that looked up to you and came to our class together, and how that's going to impact his life. And I think that's really beautiful, because we're able to serve people in a way that's not just about teaching them a technical skill that they can obviously use to financially, you know, provide for themselves and their family. That's great. But the other piece of it too is the value system, and, you know, working towards having a healthy life, financially a sound foundation, not living paycheck to paycheck, not trying to flex and wear all this and that when you really can't afford it, because ultimately that's just ego, right? Where it's like, we're actually working towards having a financial foundation that you can say no to a job. You're not forced to do things that are outside of what makes sense for your business or what makes sense for your value system. And then also too, like having a healthy family relationship, breaking those generational curses and offering a better future to your family. So I think all of that is such a beautiful story. And I think, you know, you and I are both on the same page now, where we're really thinking about, you know, I brought up a quote just recently I sent him, and it was like Mother Teresa. It's like, hey, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. Yeah. And I thought that's relevant to what we're doing now, because what we're working towards is having education here in Las Vegas, where we can be a little bit more home, a little bit more present with our own children, and we don't miss their childhood trying to go global and get that ego to be on a big stage, but to actually build something here in our actual local community where we can show people a different way. Yeah. So it's exciting, and thank you for coming on and sharing your story and being so vulnerable. And I really hope that anyone that was listening was really touched by that, and, praise God, and let's hope for a great, amazing continuation of this in the future.
Let's do it. That's right.
Let's go.